I was 31 years old, for months behind on rent, and eating instant noodles for the 9th night in a row when the app appeared on my phone. I did not download it. I want that on the record because later a great many powerful men would accuse me of a great many things, and this is the one accusation I can answer cleanly. I never went looking for the penny ledger. Came looking for me. My name is Daniel Reyes. That winter I was a failed man by every measure the city kept. My logistics startup had died 18 months earlier, taking my savings, my apartment, and most of my friends with it. I had one room above a laundromat, a laptop with a cracked screen, and a phone I kept only because the number was on resumes no one answered. The icon was a single copper coin on a black field. No name under it. When I opened it, there was one line of white text on an empty screen. Spend 1 cent. Receive everything that cent was worth to the one who needed it. Below that, a single button, begin. I assumed it was a scam, the kind that empties whatever account you're foolish enough to link. But I had $11 to my name and nothing left to protect, so I pressed the button the way you press a bruise, to see if it still hurt. The screen asked for 1 cent. Not $1. Not my card. 1 cent, and it offered to take it from the forgotten change in my digital wallet. A balance of 6 cents I'd never bothered to withdraw. I tapped yes. First ledger entry, the screen said. Find someone whose problem costs 1 cent to solve. Solve it. The ledger settles its debts. Then it showed me a map of my own neighborhood, and one address glowing soft gold, 2 streets away. I should have deleted it. Instead I put on my coat. Chapter 2, the first entry. The glowing address belonged to a corner newsstand run by an old man named Mr. Okafor, who I'd bought gum from maybe twice. He was standing at his register that night arguing with a customer over a receipt, and I lingered by the magazines like a shoplifter, feeling ridiculous, waiting for a 1 cent problem to reveal itself. It did. The customer left, furious. Mr. Okafor slumped, and I heard him mutter that his card reader had been rejecting one specific bank's cards all week, and he'd lost a dozen sales, and he couldn't afford the service call to fix it. I knew that reader. My dead startup had used the same model. The fix was a settings toggle buried 3 menus deep, a known firmware glitch. Cost nothing. It cost, if you counted the electricity to change it, approximately 1 cent. I offered to look. He was too tired to say no. 90 seconds later his reader accepted a test card from that bank, and the old man stared at it like I'd raised the dead. He tried to give me $20. I didn't take it. I can't fully explain why, except that the whole thing felt conditional, like a test I could still fail, and taking his money felt like the wrong answer. I walked out into the cold, and before I reached the corner, my phone buzzed. Ledger entry settled. Value of problem to Mr. Okafor, $1,840. Your settlement. 2x value retained as credit. Balance. $3,680. I sat down on the curb in the snow and read it 4 times. $3,680. For a settings toggle. The app hadn't paid me what the fix was worth in labor. A few minutes of it, it had paid me double what solving the problem was worth to the man who had it. A month of lost sales recovered, and it hadn't touched his money at all. His $20 was still in his pocket. The number on my screen had come from somewhere else. Somewhere the ledger kept its own books. I want to tell you I was suspicious. But I was also 31, broke, and holding proof that the math of my life had just changed. I went home and I did not sleep, and I made a list of every person I knew with a small, cheap, ignored problem. The list was long. Broke men know a lot of other people the world has stopped helping. Chapter 3, the rules I wrote. By the end of the first week I understood the shape of it, and I wrote the rules down the way my father wrote down everything that mattered in a cheap notebook in pen so I couldn't pretend later that I'd forgotten them. Rule 1. The ledger paid for solved problems, not for spending. I could not simply throw pennies at the void. There had to be a person, a real problem, and a real solution. The app was not a slot machine. It was a mirror that paid you back double whatever good you actually did. Rule 2. Paid by the value to the person, not the cost to me. A 1 cent fix that saved a man his livelihood paid enormously. A 1 cent fix for a problem nobody cared about paid almost nothing. The ledger measured need, not effort. This changed how I looked at everyone I met. I stopped asking what a person could give me and started asking what quietly broke thing was costing them the most. Rule 3. I never took their money. Not once. The instant I tried to profit from the person directly, the entry soured. I tested it once, and the balance the ledger offered dropped to nothing. It would double what I gave. It would give nothing for what I grabbed. Rule 4, which I added later and which mattered most. Keep the source hidden. Because a man who fixes small problems for free and grows quietly rich draws exactly one kind of attention, and it is not the kind that helps you. I was still living above the laundromat when my balance crossed $100,000. I did not move. I bought a second laptop and a good chair and left the cracked phone exactly where it was, because the app lived on it, and I had begun to suspect the app did not want to be moved. Then I made my first real decision. I stopped fixing card readers. I started buying the buildings the card readers were in. Chapter 4. Spend on what remains. Here was the secret the ledger rewarded. The one I'd stumbled into on a snowy curb. It doubled my credit, and I still kept whatever the credit bought. If I spent the money on a dinner, I'd have a memory and nothing else. But if I spent it on a thing that lasted, a building, a company, a stake in someone else's honest work, I'd have the doubled credit and the asset still standing, still earning forever. The trigger never changed, by the way. Every entry still cost exactly 1 cent, the same forgotten change from my wallet. The ledger never wanted my money. It only ever wanted the act. So I solved bigger problems and I bought what remained. A family bakery 3 blocks over was drowning under a predatory equipment lease. The problem, to them, was worth their entire livelihood, decades of it. I bought out the lease, restructured it at a fair rate, and asked for nothing but a small ownership share they were glad to give a man who'd saved them. The ledger settled the entry at a number that made me put the phone down and walk around the room. I did it again and again. A print shop, a shipping cooperative, a neighborhood pharmacy that a chain was trying to squeeze out. Each time I found the quietly breaking thing, I fixed it honestly, I took a fair stake instead of a fee, and the ledger paid me double the weight of the trouble I'd lifted. Within 2 years, I owned quiet pieces of 200 small businesses across the city. All of them healthier than when I found them. All of them run by grateful people who knew my first name and nothing else. On paper, none of it was even mine. It belonged to a holding company with a plain name, Okafor Holdings, because the old man at the newsstand had been the first entry, and I am sentimental about ledgers. I was, by any honest accounting, extremely wealthy. And no one who passed me on the street would have guessed I owned more than my coat. Chapter 5. The Man Who Noticed. Wealth that helps people is quiet, but it is not invisible. It leaves a shape in the world, a neighborhood where the small shops stop dying, and there are men whose entire business is reading shapes like that. His name was Victor Crane, and he owned the kind of company that buys struggling businesses cheap, strips them for parts, and sells the emptied shells. 4 years, the poorest districts of the city had been his easiest hunting ground. Then, one district at a time, his prey started refusing to die. He assumed a rival was moving against him. He spent real money trying to find the fund buying up all these little companies, and his people traced it eventually through 3 layers of paper to Okafor Holdings, and to a 33-year-old man with no MBA, no investors, and no visible income still living above a laundromat. He was so certain it was a front for someone bigger that he came to see me himself. I made him tea in my one room. He looked at the cracked phone on the windowsill and the good chair and the 2 laptops and could not make the numbers of my life add up, and that not adding up was the most dangerous thing in the room because men like Victor Crane do not tolerate a variable they cannot solve. He offered to buy Okafor Holdings for a sum that would have made me wealthy in the ordinary way. When I declined, he offered to make me a partner. When I declined that, the temperature of the room changed and he told me, smiling, always smiling, that businesses without powerful friends have a way of running into trouble. Then he left, and I sat with my tea, and I understood that the quiet part of my life was over. Chapter 6. The Ledger's Largest Entry. I did not fight Victor Crane the way he expected, because I had an advantage he could not imagine. I knew exactly what my strange app rewarded, and it was the precise opposite of everything he was. He solved his problems by taking. The ledger paid me for giving. So I did not go to war. I went shopping. I found every business Victor Crane was currently circling, the wounded ones, the ones he'd already begun to squeeze, and I got there first. not to strip them, to save them. Each rescue was an entry, and each entry was worth, to the desperate owner, everything they had. The ledger settled those debts at numbers I had never seen it produce. One morning the app showed me a single line that made my hands go cold. Find the man whose greatest problem costs the most to solve. The largest debt in the city awaits settlement. And it put a golden marker not on a shop or a family, but on a tower downtown, the headquarters of Crane Capital. I understood then, in a way that frightened me, that the ledger did not see Victor Crane as my enemy. It saw him as the largest broken thing in the city, a man whose greed had hollowed out 10,000 livelihoods, and it was offering to let me settle him. Not destroy him, settle him. There is a difference, and finding it was the hardest thing I ever did. Chapter 7: Settling the Debt. Crane Capital fell the ordinary way, in the end, the way all such houses fall. It had borrowed to buy its cruelty, and cruelty is expensive to maintain. I did not have to lie or steal or spill anything. I simply did, at scale, the one thing I had learned to do on a snowy curb 2 years earlier. I found the people Victor Crane had broken, and I made them whole, bought the debts he'd weaponized, refinanced the leases he'd sharpened into knives, and quietly became the largest creditor of a man who had built his fortune on the assumption that no one would ever help the people he hunted. When his own financing came due and his lenders came calling, the only buyer large enough to rescue Crane Capital was a plane holding company named after a newsstand. He came to my one room a second time. He was thinner. The smile was gone. He asked me, almost gently, how a man with nothing had done this, and I gave him the only true answer I had. You spent your life taking small things from people who couldn't stop you, I said. I spent 2 years giving small things to people no one else would help. We both compounded. That's all money ever does. It doubles whatever you already are. I did not gloat. I bought his company at a fair price, kept every employee who had never chosen his cruelty, dissolved the parts that existed only to hurt, and made every family he had ever hollowed out an offer to buy back what he'd taken, at the price he'd paid for it. Then I offered Victor Crane himself a job, an honest one, small, real, with a path upward if he ever learned to build instead of break. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw him weigh it, and I saw him fail to understand it, and he walked out into the cold the same way he'd walked in, still unable to solve the one variable that had beaten him. That was the last entry the ledger ever asked of me. After it settled, the app showed me a screen I had never seen. All debts settled. The ledger is balanced. And then, quietly, the copper coin faded from my phone, and the app was gone, and it has never come back. Chapter 8: The Balance. People ask me what it was. The app, the ledger, the coin. I tell them the truth, which is that I don't know, and I stopped needing to. I kept the room above the laundromat. I own a great deal of the city now, quietly, the way I own everything. The accountant's Okafor Holdings pays to worry about such things told me, without much ceremony, that my share of it had crossed $1 billion sometime the previous spring. I remember I was fixing a leaking tap when they called, and I finished fixing the tap. But I sleep best in the one room where a broke man once pressed a button like pressing a bruise. The cracked phone sits on the windowsill still, dark now, a dead coin on a black field. I never found out where the money came from. I know only what it cost and what it bought, and the difference between those two numbers is the only fortune I have ever cared about. My father used to say that a man is just his ledger, that at the end, they add up what you took and subtract it from what you gave, and the number left over is the whole of you. I think the app knew that. I think in the end that is all the app ever was. A mirror that paid in advance, doubling whatever you already were, 1 honest cent at a time. Last week I passed the old newsstand. Mr. Okafor is retired now. His granddaughter runs it, and she doesn't know my name. I bought a pack of gum and paid with exact change, and on the walk home I felt my phone buzz in my pocket, and for one impossible second my heart stopped. It was nothing, a weather alert, but I stood on the corner in the cold a long time, holding a dead phone, half hoping, the way you do, that somewhere a ledger still had one more entry left with my name on it. Didn't. It was balanced. I'd spent my life learning the one lesson it came to teach. Spend on what remains. Give more than you take. The rest is just arithmetic.